Okay, the second part of the brief history of the Roman Empire, very brief. We started with the legend of Romulus and Remus, the twins. They get into a fight. Romulus kills Remus, and according to the legend, 753 before the Common Era, Romulus establishes the nucleus of the city of Rome, naming it after his own name. He is uh, mentioned as the first king of Rome, and the monarchy period altogether lasts approximately 250 years, and there is a sequence of 7 kings. Again, this is part myth, part legend, part historical facts, all mixed in together. In any case, in approximately 509 actually, the last king is dethroned by the body of counselors that surround him, and the Senate, that is called Senate, and the Senate basically takes over the power, the control of the state. At this point, Rome is still a very tiny entity. It has fought with its neighbors in the surrounding area. So to call these people king would be like, to call the mayor of Yonkers the king of Yonkers, something like this. Um, Once the Senate establishes its power, they select among themselves a leader called council, and they give him a term of 1 year to avoid giving anybody too much power and time to establish a personal dictatorship or personal power. This system works very well for about 500 years, and we will get to that pretty quickly. So the Roman Republic, this is the period called the Roman Republic, has at the center of the administration and the state the Senate. The senators are representatives of the patrician families, but slowly, with the evolution of the system, also lower classes of citizens, popular uh, with popular leaders, begin to have a say in the matters of the state through their elected officials. Some families, we would call them today, are more quote unquote democratic, and they're closer to the issues of the people, the Roman citizens. Some represent the hierarchy, some represent the power, the powerful, the rich, the landowners, so that in the Senate there is altogether a mix of individuals that represent the entire society. There is always strife, there are always violent attempts to change the situation. We're not talking about an ideal democratic society where things are discussed openly and friendly in an assembly. It's part of what the times were like. But it is during this period that Rome expands and becomes a major power on equal footing with other powers at the time. The very first jump into into expansion was the conquest of southern Italy, the expansion into southern Italy, which at the time was colonized primarily by Greeks. And in fact, that area south of Rome, starting more or less around Naples, is called, at the time was called Magna Graecia, the larger, the greater Greece. They pushed into this area, which was extremely rich in terms of agricultural products. Greece has very infertile terrain, not particularly suitable for large production of agricultural goods, which at the time were 90, 95%, maybe more of the economy. So Rome establishes a presence, begins to harvest the richness of the area, primarily grains, wheat, grapes, which make wine, olives for olive oil, which are extremely important commodities at the time, the richest and most expensive commodities. The expansion continues. Rome engages in wars with neighbors and slowly takes control of first the Western Mediterranean. Then it pushes northward and conquers what is called now northern Italy, which at the time was not considered Italy at all. In fact, it was considered part of southern France, called Gaul. The leader who started pushing, he expanded the boundaries of the Roman Empire was Julius Caesar, with his conquest of the entire French region, again called Gaul. And with the evolution of the state, there is always a shifting of power and attempts of various factions to establish control over the levers of power in the state. Rome is now very prosperous, very rich, and it drifts in toward the direction of a dictatorship. The Senate is losing power pretty rapidly. Julius Caesar allies himself with Pompeius, who at the time was the greatest military leader, and with Crassus, the richest man in Rome. The three of them form what was called the triumvirate. Triumvirate means three men, and impose their will upon the Senate. Of course, they have large support from the various constituencies that are bound to gain and to have their interests represented by them. Julius Caesar then, the three of them, of course, cannot last as a triumvirate for very long. The alliance falls apart, and in the end, Julius Caesar emerges the winner of a long and protracted civil war. Julius Caesar was a great PR man for himself because he wrote about first his campaign in Gaul, the book De Bello Gallico on the Gallic Wars, and also wrote a subsequent book, De Bello Civili, on the Civil War, describing his fight first against the Gauls, and the second book about the fight against his former allies Pompeius and Crassus. I don't know, this may sound confusing, but if you look at from a broader perspective, Rome has three periods, major periods. The monarchy, where it is a negligible power. The Republican period, 500 years, when it really acquires a regional dimension and begins to exercise its influence on a much broader area, Northern Europe and the Mediterranean. And with the arrival of Julius Caesar, the Republican period ends, and technically or historically, the empire begins. Caesar, as you saw in the film, is assassinated before the Senate can officially recognize him as a dictator in perpetuity. But he has already opened the road toward the next phase. And the next phase is the alliance between Mark Antony, whom we see again in Shakespeare, and and Caesar's grandson, Octavianus. In English, it's Octavian. The two of them end up again fighting with each other until Octavianus defeats Marcus Antonius, Mark Antony, who was famously allied with the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, who, by the way, was not Egyptian, but was Greek. So we come to the year 44 when Caesar is assassinated, and you know the reasons Shakespeare gives for that. And from that point on, the third and last phase of the Roman era begins, which is the Roman Empire. And this is what I'm going to talk about in the third part.